So almost as an offhand comment, in the course of deciding this case about taxation, the Supreme Court of the United States said that yes, corporations should be considered persons and should be protected as if they are persons under the rules of the United States Constitution. Okay, that's a really important point because the corporation up until this day, largely due to that case, is legally considered to be an individual, and it is protected by the constitutional rights that protect all of us as individuals in the United States of America. For a recent example of the use of the idea of corporation as individual is the case that was adjudicated last year in 2010 called Citizens United Appellate versus Federal Election Commission. And this was a case that held that corporate funding of independent political broadcasts in candidate elections cannot be limited because corporations are protected by, for free speech under the First Amendment of the Constitution, because again, they are legally considered to be persons. But because corporations are not actually really individuals, they are not liable for criminal prosecution in the ways that actual human beings are. So they are protected, they have rights under the Constitution, but they do not have the same duties and responsibilities and liabilities. They have different duties, responsibilities, and liabilities because they're not actually really people, they are fictional individuals created by this artifice of the court. So corporations, for example, obviously they cannot go to jail. You can't find a corporation and prosecute it in that way. What they can get as punishment is fines. But they get to deduct court costs and lawyer fees off their taxes as part of business expenses. And they regularly do something, a device called the cost-benefit analysis, which we are being asked to do in higher education now. The cost-benefit analysis, to see whether it would be cheaper to break laws and pay fines or to obey laws and risk damaging their profits. So which thing would be cheaper, to break the law and get the fine, or to obey the law and have your profits damaged over the long term? And we regularly find that corporations do not care about, for example, public health, because they are driven by profit motives to sell as much product as possible. That is what drives them. That is appropriate that that's what drives them. That's what corporations are in capitalist economies. Even if the product does not work or the product is dangerous, they're driven to sell it. And there are many different examples that I'm sure come to mind for you. Cigarettes, for example. Many kinds of drugs. Almost every, several times a year, there's some report of some drug that does not work or is damaging or kills people or causes them to lose their hearing or their eyesight. Foods. Corporations repeatedly have to be told that food needs to have actual nutritional value. This is actually a debate in food policy, right? Okay, so that the idea is to sell things and to weigh the cost against the benefit. So my third point, a corporation is a fictional entity whose sole ethic is the drive for profit. Now, if we apply this ethic to universities, what happens? Students become conceptualized as customers. As I talked about in my opening remarks to the teach-in, at for-profit colleges, professors and advisors are paid according to how many students they can bring in and get to stay in their classes. And there's actually grids. That's how their salaries are calculated. One ad for a faculty member at a for-profit college sought a faculty member with a master's degree in English and excellent customer service skills. Okay, which is a very different way than the idea that professors are scholars and mentors who work for upwards of 10 to 12 years beyond high school to get a relatively low-paying job that enables them to read books and talk to other people about those books, which is kind of what we do as professional intellectuals. The idea of, at least those of us in liberal arts and humanities, so sorry to look around and realize, well, maybe not everybody does that. There are scientists and artists here too. do other things in addition to that. The idea of cost-benefit analyses requires the quantification of intangibles in our field of higher education. How do we measure the cost and the benefit of thought? How do we measure the cost and the benefit of being able to participate in a democracy? How do we measure the cost and the benefit of being able to create a better world in the long run? What do we do when thought challenges existing power structures and it is then deemed what? Not sellable. How can you who is going to buy a thought if it damages the power structure of the people who are going to, who are the consumers of that idea, right? So that thoughts that damage power structures, in particular thoughts damage economic systems that rely on cost-benefit analyses, they are not saleable. Who will buy that person? Which is what, when you go out into the marketplace to get a job, that's what you're doing. You're selling yourself as a commodity on the marketplace. Who will buy you if you are saying the wrong thing, if you're saying something that will challenge the power structure? If thought cannot be sold and sold high, it is considered useless by the laws of cost-benefit analyses. But all of our most precious ideas, almost all of them, come from thinkers who were not able to sell their ideas because their ideas went against prevailing notions of their time. Their ideas were so new that there was nowhere to sell them. There was no immediate application of those ideas. How do you sell the idea of gravity, that there is gravity? Or what is the point of having telephones? Who would use these things? How would you get them in people's houses, you know? All these kinds of amazing inventions and ideas that people have come up with that did not have immediate applicability. What is the point of Shakespeare? What is the point of reading Plato, of learning to speak Russian, or to play the violin? Corporate thinking asks us to justify things immediately in terms of how much they will cost and how much they will benefit in the short run. And benefit is defined as benefit inside the structure of the existing market economy. Those of you who are my students know I like to use illustrations from film a lot. So in 1996, TriStar Entertainment released a film directed by Cameron Crowe called Jerry Maguire. Did anyone see that? So the film had wide popular appeal, went on to win several Oscars in 1997, and it told the story of a ruthless sports agent, Jerry Maguire, played by Tom Cruise, who loses his job because he has a mission statement that he writes during a late-night epiphany about the business world. And the mission statement is entitled, "The Things We Think But Do Not Say," and it's summed up in the phrase, less profit, more personal relationships. In the film, the mission statement, initially met with cheers from his coworkers, gets Jerry fired and forms the beginning of the dramatic arc for the film's narrative about friendship, love, sports, and the business world. Certainly the director, Cameron Crowe, who has a background in music, journalism, and film, can understand the dilemma of being a creative person forced into a for-profit model. There's a tension, that is the tension we are now experiencing in higher education. Everyone in higher education feels this shift in priorities. It is perhaps the case that no one feels it more keenly than those of us in the liberal arts widely understood, where the very concept of the ivory tower and its separation from the messy world of commerce has had more meaning than most other places in the university. 2009 New York Times op-ed summed up the conflict this way. And this is a quote, "One idea that elite universities like Yale, sprawling public systems like Wisconsin," which will not be sprawling public systems much longer, it appears, and smaller private colleges like Lewis and Clark have shared for generations is that a traditional liberal arts education is by definition not intended to prepare students for a specific vocation. Rather, the critical thinking, civic and historical knowledge, and ethical reasoning that the humanities develop have a different purpose. They are prerequisites for personal growth and participation in a free democracy, regardless of one's career choice. Former Harvard University President Derek Bach has argued that the business model has been seeping into higher education since at least the 1970s, possibly even as far back as World War II. One problem noted by Bach is that the model of outcomes and assessments, which faculty members in this room will know that is what we were asked to do now all the time, outcomes, assessments, and measurements are not adaptable to what we do in education. Bach writes, leading a university is also a much more uncertain and ambiguous enterprise than managing a company, because the market for higher education lacks tangible, measurable goals by which to measure success. Academic leaders cannot look to precise indicators comparable to market share, return on investment, stock prices, or cost per unit of production to determine how well their institution is progressing. Yet we're asked to do that all the time, by the way. No university can measure the value of the research output or determine reliably how much its students are learning. Indeed, sometimes students do not realize what they've learned until many years after a course has been completed. In fact, ideally, learning in one course builds on learning in another course, as well as on one's life experience, so that measurement tools that track learning from one course or one faculty member are relatively useless. They're not really measuring what we would consider and traditionally consider to be learning in higher education. But that's used because that's the kind of corporate way of tracking and assessing. Certainly, the traditional idea of the liberal arts as an education for citizenship and life in general was designed specifically not to link education to any specific outcome, but to transform the entire life of the individual and to transform the world. In short, the goal is to create a subject who can engage in enlightened transformation of the world rather than one who fits into an already existing slot determined by the needs of the market. If the outcome of the liberal arts are not easily measured, it is because the entire notion of the liberal arts is anathema to a project that assumes a one-to-one causal link between knowledge identified as skill set and a particular job, action, or vocation. In fact, to require this of higher education is to fundamentally transform it and perhaps even to destroy it. So I'll stop there, and let me see our time, how I did on time here before I say that you can ask me questions.